This is a true story, but the names of the characters have been changed. My name is Lisa, and I just went through the biggest shock of my life. When my husband's best friend started showing up more often, I felt uneasy. But I never imagined the harsh reality that was about to unfold. They betrayed me right in our own home. And when I spoke out, my in-laws chose silence and cover up over honesty. They wanted me to turn a blind eye, but I chose to speak up. This is my story, and I want to know, what would you do if you were in my place? My name is Lisa, and I'm 29 years old. I live with my husband, Mark, in a small but cozy house just outside of Portland, Oregon. Our home has 2 bedrooms and a tiny backyard garden that we both take care of on weekends. On Sunday afternoons, Mark usually sits on the porch, sipping a cold beer while I water the plants or tend to the lavender bushes. Life feels peaceful, at least, that's what I used to think. Portland is a unique place, with light rain falling throughout the spring and autumn. There's a soft chill in the air, and the humidity lingers like a gentle hug. It's the kind of city where nature and urban life blend seamlessly. We often take walks in Forest Park on weekend afternoons and enjoy lattes from the quirky, hipster cafes on Alberta Street. I used to feel so lucky to have this simple, serene life with the man I love. But there was one thing that always kept me slightly on edge: Jessica. Jessica is Mark's childhood best friend, and she's become an inseparable part of our lives. They grew up together in a small town near Bend, Oregon, and from what Mark has told me, they were the kind of friends everyone knew about. They played on the high school baseball team together, shared summer weekends at Crater Lake, and have countless inside jokes I can't even begin to understand. Even when I married Mark, I never expected Jessica to still be such a constant presence. Jessica is attractive in that effortless, all-American way: blonde hair, sun-kissed skin, and a confident smile. She works as a freelance graphic designer, which gives her a flexible schedule. And it seems like she's always using that flexibility to spend time with Mark. I'm not the controlling type, but it's hard not to notice when she shows up at every family gathering, joins us on weekend trips, and even pops by our house on random weeknights. At first, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Portland is a pretty open-minded city. It's normal here for men and women to maintain friendships, even close ones. But when I started feeling like a third wheel in my own marriage, my unease turned into a gnawing doubt. Whenever I brought it up with Mark, he would laugh it off. "You're being too sensitive, Lisa," he'd say, looking at me with that gentle, but slightly puzzled expression. "Jessica is like a sister to me. We've known each other forever. You have nothing to worry about." So I tried to believe him. I told myself it was just silly jealousy, that there was nothing to it. But as time went on, the little gestures between Mark and Jessica, like the way their hands lingered when they high-fived, or the shared glances that seemed to hold a private joke, became harder to ignore. I started questioning myself: am I just imagining things, or is this a wife's intuition telling me something is wrong? Jessica would come over unannounced. One Saturday morning, after I got home from a yoga class, I found her already sitting on our couch, having coffee with Mark and laughing at something he was saying. They looked so comfortable together that I had to remind myself this was my house, my life. "Oh hey, Lisa, you're back." Jessica greeted me with a casual, easy smile. "Mark was just telling me about your hike last weekend. It sounded amazing." I forced a smile in return, but there was a cold knot forming in my stomach. I didn't remember sharing that story with her. It was Mark who must have told her. He had shared our private moments with Jessica, as if she were an essential part of our relationship too. There were nights when I lay next to Mark, feeling a distance growing between us, even though he was physically close. He'd be absorbed in his phone, texting or scrolling through social media, and I started noticing that many of those texts were from Jessica. I kept telling myself that I needed to trust my husband, that Jessica was just a friend. But a wife's intuition is rarely wrong. I love Mark. I love the life we'd built together, from the early morning coffees to the spontaneous camping trips on weekends. But now, every time I see the smile on Mark's face when he talks about Jessica, I feel a shadow of doubt creeping in. The seeds of suspicion have been planted, and I know I have to act before they grow into cracks in the foundation of our marriage. It all started with little things. Mark began coming home later than usual, always with excuses about late meetings or last-minute catch-ups with old friends. At first, I believed him. Both of us had demanding jobs. Mark works as a sales manager at a tech firm, and I run a small boutique downtown. Working late isn't unusual for us, but lately, it felt like Mark was always busy with work. One Wednesday evening, I decided to surprise him at his office with takeout from his favorite Thai place. I thought he'd be happy to see me, but when I arrived, his desk was empty. The lights were off, and the entire floor was silent. I texted him, asking where he was, and he replied almost immediately, saying he was still stuck in a meeting. I didn't confront him then, but it felt like a small crack had formed in the wall of trust between us. Then I noticed Mark acting strangely with his phone. He used to leave it lying around the kitchen counter or on the couch, never worrying who might see it. But now, he kept it with him constantly, even taking it into the bathroom or slipping it into his pocket whenever I walked into the room. He had also turned off notification previews, so I couldn't see who was texting or calling. It was subtle, but these changes didn't escape my notice. One night, as we were watching TV together, his phone buzzed. I glanced over and saw the name Jessica flash on the screen before he quickly turned it face down. "Is everything okay?" I asked casually. "Yeah, it's just Jessica," he said, not looking up. She needed advice on a project she's working on. Advice at 10 p.m.? I tried to laugh it off, but Mark's face tightened, and he quickly changed the subject. Then there was the camping trip. Mark and I had planned a weekend getaway to Mount Hood, something we'd been looking forward to for months. We packed our tent, marshmallows for s'mores, and a couple of bottles of wine. I wanted it to be a romantic escape, just the two of us. But when we arrived at the campsite, Jessica was already there, setting up her tent right next to ours. I thought it'd be fun if she joined us, Mark explained with an awkward grin. "You don't mind, do you?" I swallowed my frustration and forced a smile. "No, of course not," I lied. But the entire weekend felt different after that. Instead of cuddling by the campfire, Mark and Jessica spent hours reminiscing about their high school days, talking about people and places I had no connection to. I felt like an outsider, sitting there with my glass of wine, watching them laugh and finish each other's sentences. The worst part was that night. I had gone to bed early, exhausted from the day's hike. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of hushed voices and laughter outside the tent. Peeking through the flap, I saw Mark and Jessica sitting close together by the fire, wrapped in a shared blanket. They were leaning in, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, looking so at ease with each other that it made my chest tighten. I wanted to say something, to ask what the hell was going on, but the words got stuck in my throat. I went back to bed, but my sleep was restless, filled with racing thoughts and questions I was too afraid to ask. The following week, more signs piled up. One morning, while tidying up the kitchen, I noticed Mark's favorite hoodie wasn't hanging by the door like it usually was. I asked him about it, and he shrugged. "I must have left it at the gym," he said casually. But a few days later, I saw Jessica wearing that same hoodie in a selfie she posted on Instagram, captioned, "Borrowing this for the weekend." "Thanks, bestie." My stomach dropped when I saw it. That night, I showed Mark the photo. "Oh, come on, Lisa," he sighed. "It's just a hoodie." Jessica was cold, so I lent it to her. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." "Am I?" I snapped back. "Because it feels like I'm missing something here. You're spending more time with her than you are with me lately." He threw up his hands in exasperation. "You're overthinking this. She's my friend. That's all." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was overthinking it. But the uneasy feeling inside me kept growing, gnawing at my thoughts like a splinter I couldn't ignore. It felt like I was piecing together a puzzle, and every new piece only added to the picture I didn't want to see. A few weeks later, Mark told me he was going to a networking event downtown. He seemed off, more dressed up than usual for a casual work outing. I decided to call Emily and ask if she wanted to meet for drinks nearby. As we sat chatting in a booth, I saw Mark and Jessica walk into the bar together. They didn't notice us, but I saw them. Jessica was holding onto his arm, laughing at something he'd said. They looked like a couple on a date, not two old friends catching up. Emily turned to me, her expression serious. "Lisa, you need to say something. This isn't normal." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know," I whispered. "But what if I'm wrong? What if it's all in my head?" Emily squeezed my hand. "And what if it's not?" I drove home that night with tears stinging my eyes. I wanted to confront Mark right then, but I knew I had to be careful. If I accused him without proof, he'd just brush it off as paranoia. I needed more than these gut feelings, I needed solid evidence. The signs were everywhere, yet Mark continued to act as if nothing was wrong. It was driving me crazy, making me question everything I saw, every word he said. But one thing I knew for sure, I couldn't ignore these growing doubts any longer. I decided I couldn't keep sitting around, letting my suspicions eat away at me. If I wanted to know the truth, I had to take matters into my own hands. So, one Friday night, when Mark said he was meeting some friends from work, I decided to follow him. I kept my distance, making sure not to get too close. My heart was pounding as I trailed behind his car, through the dimly lit streets of downtown Portland. He drove to a bar in the Pearl District, a place we'd been to many times before. I parked a few spots away and watched as he stepped out of his car. I expected him to walk in alone, but then I saw Jessica's car pull up right. I expected him to walk in alone, but then I saw Jessica's car pull up right behind him. She got out, wearing a tight black dress, looking like she was ready for a night out. They exchanged a quick, familiar smile, before heading inside together. I hesitated, feeling the urge to burst in there and confront them both. But I needed proof, something I could confront Mark with that he couldn't deny. I texted Emily, telling her where I was, and she replied almost instantly, "Do you need me to come over?" "No, I need to handle this myself," I typed back, my hands shaking. I decided to go inside but stayed in the shadows, choosing a table in a dark corner where I could watch without being seen. They sat at the bar, leaning in close as they talked. Mark was laughing, his hand resting casually on Jessica's back. It was such an intimate gesture, one I hadn't seen from him in a long time. I pulled out my phone, trying to take a picture, but it was too dark. The photos came out blurry, nothing concrete. I watched them for almost an hour, my stomach churning with a mix of fear and rage. But nothing happened beyond what could be considered friendly. They didn't kiss or touch in any obvious way. When they finally left, I felt more confused than ever. If they were having an affair, why weren't they being more discreet? And if they weren't, why did it look so much like a date? The following weekend, I tried a different approach. I decided to check Mark's phone when he was in the shower. He used to leave it unlocked, but now he had a passcode. I tried a few different numbers, our anniversary, his birthday, even Jessica's birthday, but nothing worked. Just as I was about to give up, Mark came out of the bathroom, his hair dripping wet. He glanced at the phone in my hand and raised an eyebrow. "Looking for something?" he asked with a forced smile. I was just checking the time, I lied, but we both knew I wasn't telling the truth. He took the phone from me gently, but firmly, shaking his head. "You don't need to snoop, Lisa. There's nothing going on. You're letting your imagination run wild." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that it wasn't just my imagination. But I swallowed my anger and nodded, pretending to believe him, while inside, I felt like I was drowning in doubt. One night, I came up with what I thought was a foolproof plan. I asked a friend who works in IT if he could help me track Mark's location using his phone. It felt extreme, but I was desperate. He set it up for me, and for a few days, I felt like I was finally getting somewhere. I could see Mark's location on my phone in real time. It was a strange kind of relief, knowing exactly where he was, even if it made me feel like a stalker. But then, one Thursday evening, the tracking suddenly stopped. The app showed his location as unavailable. I called my friend, and he told me that Mark must have turned off his phone's GPS. My heart sank. Mark wasn't as clueless as I had hoped. He must have realized what I was doing and disabled it. I had been outsmarted, and now he was going to be even more careful. The next morning, I pretended everything was fine, acting like I hadn't just been caught spying on my own husband. But I could tell that Mark knew. He was more distant, more guarded. It felt like we were playing a game of cat and mouse, and I was losing. A few weeks later, I decided to try one more time. I had read online about a way to recover deleted messages from a phone backup. I waited until Mark was asleep and then quietly got his phone from the nightstand. I plugged it into my laptop, my hands shaking as I followed the steps I'd memorized. It took what felt like hours, but I finally managed to pull up some old text messages. I scrolled through them, my eyes scanning for anything suspicious. But there was nothing. It was all mundane, messages from his coworkers, jokes between him and his brother, reminders about dinner plans. I sat there in the dark, feeling like an idiot. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe there really was nothing going on. Then, just as I was about to give up, I saw it, a message from Jessica, buried deep in the deleted texts. It was short, just 2 words, but it sent a chill down my spine, miss you. And Mark's reply was just as unsettling, you too. I closed the laptop and put the phone back, my heart racing. It wasn't much, just a tiny crack in the facade. But it was enough to keep the doubts alive. After that, I tried following Mark a few more times, but each attempt ended the same way. He'd take unexpected turns, slip into crowded areas, or simply disappear. I started to wonder if he knew I was tailing him. The feeling of helplessness grew stronger each time, like I was chasing a shadow I could never catch. I confided in Emily again, and she suggested hiring a private investigator. It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a movie. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like my only option. I needed proof, real proof, if I was going to confront him once and for all. But even then, I hesitated. What if I found nothing? What if it really was all in my head? And worse, what if I found out I was right all along? It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, too scared to jump but unable to step back. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs, but every attempt to uncover the truth had only led to more confusion and heartache. I was stuck, trapped in this limbo of uncertainty. The harder I tried to find answers, the more elusive they became. And all the while, Mark continued to act as if nothing had changed, as if we were still the same happy couple we once were. But I knew we weren't. And I knew that sooner or later, something would have to give. 4. Planning with Emily, the relentless search for evidence, expanded. When I shared all my suspicions with Emily, the late nights, Mark's secretive behavior with his phone, and the uncomfortable moments with Jessica, she didn't hesitate for a second. We need a plan, Lisa, she said firmly. We can't keep guessing. We need to know for sure. We met at our usual coffee spot, a cozy place downtown with exposed brick walls and an atmosphere that made it feel like a safe haven. Emily pulled out her notebook and flipped to a blank page. At the top, she wrote in bold letters, evidence. We need something undeniable, she said, looking me straight in the eyes. A few photos and vague text messages aren't enough. We need proof that Mark can't talk his way out of. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and relief. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. But what if they're careful? What if they only text and keep things friendly in public? Emily tapped her pen against the table, thinking. We have to keep watching them. But we need to create a situation where they feel safe enough to drop their guard. We sketched out a plan together. I would pretend to be out of town for a weekend work trip, giving Mark and Jessica the perfect opportunity to meet up without worrying about me. Emily would tail them, taking photos and documenting everything. If they only shared a laugh or sent a few texts, it wouldn't be enough. But if they crossed the line, we'd be ready. A few days later, I told Mark I'd be going to a conference in Seattle for the weekend. I packed a small suitcase in front of him, forcing a smile. "I'll be back by Sunday afternoon," I said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Mark looked up from his phone, giving me a quick smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "All right," he said. "Have a good trip." "I'll just be here, taking it easy." I nodded, turning away before he could see the doubt etched on my face. On Saturday, instead of driving to Seattle, I headed straight to Emily's apartment, just a few blocks away from our house. We set up our headquarters in her living room, with snacks, coffee, and a laptop connected to an app that tracked Mark's phone location. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Mark was at home, not doing anything unusual. But as the evening wore on, his location suddenly changed. He was on the move. "Here we go," Emily said, gripping my hand. "He just left the house." We watched as the tracking signal showed Mark driving to a familiar spot, a bar downtown that we used to go to together. My stomach twisted when we saw Jessica's car pull up right behind his. They went inside, and Emily decided to follow them in to take some photos. I stayed behind in the car, my heart racing. A few minutes later, Emily came back with her phone in hand. "I got some pictures," she said, showing me the screen. There they were, Mark and Jessica, sitting close together at the bar, laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. Mark leaned in, whispering something in her ear, and Jessica threw her head back in laughter, her hand resting lightly on his arm. But beyond those moments of intimacy, there was nothing more. "They're just laughing and talking," I said, my voice flat with disappointment. "It's still not enough." Emily squeezed my hand. "I know. But we have to be patient. We'll keep trying." In the days that followed, I took every chance I could to check Mark's phone. He was careful, deleting most of his messages. But with Emily's help, I managed to recover a few. One text from Jessica stood out: "I wish we had more time together." And Mark's reply was equally vague, but troubling, "Me too." Reading those words felt like a punch to the gut, but I knew it wasn't enough. Mark could easily claim they were just joking, that it was nothing more than friendly banter. The following weekend, we decided to tail them once more. This time, Emily positioned herself at a corner table in a cafe where they were meeting for lunch. She took a few more photos, Mark and Jessica sharing a meal, leaning in close as they talked, even splitting a coffee. But again, it wasn't definitive. They still looked like friends who were just a little too comfortable with each other. Back at Emily's apartment, I scrolled through the photos on her phone, feeling like I was staring at pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. "It's still not enough," I said, frustration boiling over. "They can still explain this away." Emily frowned, her worry evident. "What are you going to do next?" I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "I don't know," I admitted. "We've done everything we can, but it's not enough to confront him. Maybe I need to hire a private investigator." Emily nodded, squeezing my hand in support. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you every step of the way." I opened my eyes and looked at the photos again. Even though they weren't enough to expose the truth completely, I knew I was close. The signs were there, the tension was building, and I felt like I was on the edge of something big. I was just one step away from the undeniable proof I needed. The next night, I was really shocked and barely breathed as I stared at the live feed on my phone. The hidden camera I had placed in the living room, disguised as a small potted plant on the shelf, streamed the footage directly to me. Emily sat beside me, her face tense, both of us watching the screen in silence, unable to look away. At first, everything seemed normal. Mark was sitting on the couch, flipping through TV channels like he usually did. I almost started to doubt myself, thinking maybe I had been too paranoid. But then, the doorbell rang. I watched in disbelief as Mark got up, walked to the door, and opened it. It was Jessica. She stood there with a bottle of wine in her hand, wearing a casual tank top and jeans, like she was just dropping by for a friendly visit. My heart sank as Mark stepped aside, welcoming her in without a moment's hesitation. Maybe they're just meeting up to talk about something work-related, I whispered to myself, clinging to the last shred of hope. But Emily's expression said it all. She squeezed my hand, signaling me to keep watching. Jessica made herself comfortable on the couch, sitting so close that her knee brushed against Mark's. He poured them both a glass of wine, and they clinked glasses, laughing about something I couldn't hear. The way they looked at each other, sharing secret smiles, made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the laughter, it was the casual touches, the way Mark's hand lingered on hers when he handed her the glass. I bit down on my lip so hard I tasted blood. "They're too comfortable," I whispered, my voice shaking. "This isn't how friends act." As the minutes ticked by, I watched in horror as they leaned closer. Mark draped his arm across the back of the sofa, his fingers lightly brushing Jessica's shoulder. It was such an intimate gesture, one he used to do with me when we first started dating. Then, Jessica shifted closer, curling her legs beneath her as she leaned into Mark's side. He didn't push her away. Instead, he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. My breath hitched as I saw Jessica tilt her head, locking eyes with Mark. The look they exchanged was filled with longing, a look of pure desire. "He's going to kiss her," Emily whispered, her voice tied with dread. "No," I choked out. "He wouldn't." But he did. Mark lifted her chin gently, just like he used to do with me. He leaned in, and Jessica met him halfway. Their lips met in a deep, slow kiss, full of passion, like two lovers who had been waiting for this moment. I couldn't watch anymore. I slammed my phone down on the table, my entire body trembling. "I have to go home," I said, standing up abruptly. "I can't let them get away with this." "Are you sure?" Emily asked, her face pale. "Maybe you should wait, think this through." "No," I interrupted, grabbing my car keys. "I've waited long enough. They need to know that I've seen everything." The drive home was a blur. I could barely see the road through my tears. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The image of them kissing replayed in my mind over and over, each time like a fresh wound. I had suspected for so long, but seeing it with my own eyes felt like someone had torn out my heart. When I pulled up to the house, Jessica's car was still parked in the driveway, as if she had every right to be there. Rage boiled up inside me. I slammed the car door and stormed toward the front door. I didn't even bother knocking. I shoved the key into the lock and threw the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. They were still on the couch, wrapped up in each other as if they had no care in the world. When the door flew open, they jumped apart like guilty children caught doing something forbidden. "Lisa!" Mark blurted out, his face going pale. He scrambled to his feet but didn't step closer. I thought you were in Seattle." Jessica stood there frozen, her eyes wide with fear. The guilt on her face was unmistakable. She didn't even try to speak. "Clearly, I'm not," I spat, stepping into the living room. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I'd never know?" Mark raised his hands, trying to placate me. "Lisa, please, it's not what it looks like. We were just..." "Just what?" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "Just sitting here making out on my couch? Drinking my wine? How long has this been going on?" Jessica burst into tears, her shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry, Lisa," she sobbed. "This was a mistake. I don't know what we were thinking." "You knew exactly what you were doing," I snapped, blinking back my own tears. "You've both been lying to me this whole time." Mark reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I yanked it away. "Don't touch me," I snarled. "Don't you dare." He dropped his hand, looking utterly defeated. I love you, Lisa, he whispered, his voice breaking. This was a mistake. It won't happen again. I swear. This wasn't a mistake, I shot back. It was a choice. You both made a choice. The silence was suffocating. Jessica sank back down onto the couch, covering her face with her hands, while Mark just stood there, staring at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. Then, suddenly, Mark fell to his knees in front of me, his voice filled with desperation. Lisa, please. Don't tell my family. We're having a big party this weekend, my mom's been planning it for weeks. If you say something now, it'll ruin everything. Please, just wait until after the party. We can talk about this, fix this, I swear. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think I care about some stupid party? I yelled. After everything you've done? I know I messed up, Mark pleaded. But I'm begging you. Just keep this between us for now. Please, for my mother's sake. Jessica stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. Please, Lisa, she begged. Think about his family. I know we were wrong, but don't hurt them because of our mistake. I felt like I was going to explode. Everything was spinning in my head, betrayal, pain, and now this desperate plea for silence. I took a deep breath, struggling to stay calm. Fine, I said coldly. I'll stay quiet for the party. But after that, I want both of you out of my life. Mark nodded frantically, looking like he couldn't believe what I had just said. Thank you, Lisa, he whispered. Thank you. But as I turned and walked away, I knew this silence wouldn't last. Because deep down, I had already made up my mind. The party was just a few days away, and when the time came, I would reveal everything. It was a perfect day for a family gathering. The sky was clear, and the air was filled with the smell of barbecue. Mark's family and friends were already gathered in the spacious backyard of his parents' house. The decorations were set up beautifully, with tables neatly arranged and string lights hanging overhead, creating a warm, festive atmosphere. This was an annual tradition where everyone came together to enjoy a day of laughter and togetherness. I arrived a bit late on purpose, waiting until everyone was already settled. Today would be the day I revealed everything. I couldn't continue pretending everything was fine while the truth gnawed away at me. As I entered the backyard, I saw Mark standing in the middle of a group, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. And right next to him, looking confident and unbothered, was Jessica. She was wearing a sleek white dress, her hair loose and flowing, looking every bit like she belonged there. It made my blood boil to see her so comfortable, so at ease, as if she hadn't done anything wrong. Mark spotted me, and the smile on his face faltered for a moment. He quickly made his way over, trying to keep up his cheerful demeanor. Lisa, you're here. Everyone's been waiting for you, he said softly, his voice filled with false warmth. I looked him straight in the eyes, forcing a tight smile. Yes, I wouldn't miss this party for the world. Mark's mother, Carol, came over and took my hand, her eyes filled with concern. Lisa, you look beautiful today, she said kindly. We're so happy you could make it. I returned her smile, but my gaze remained fixed on Jessica, who was standing right next to Mark. She flashed me a smug smile, as if she had already won. You're late, Lisa, Jessica said with a hint of mockery in her voice. We started without you. I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my composure. I wouldn't want to miss such a special gathering, especially with such special guests present. Mark grabbed my hand, pulling me aside. Lisa, please, he whispered urgently. Just for today, let it go. We can talk about this after the party, I promise. I yanked my hand away, glaring at him. You really think I'm going to stay silent after everything you've done? Before Mark could respond, his father, Richard, stepped over with a stern look on his face. Is there a problem here? He asked loudly, drawing everyone's attention. I couldn't hold back any longer. Yes, there is, I said, my voice trembling with anger. I think it's time everyone knows the truth. The chatter around us died down, and suddenly all eyes were on me. Jessica stood there, her face completely calm, as if she knew she had nothing to worry about. "Lisa, what's going on?" Carol asked, her voice filled with worry. "What's going on?" I laughed bitterly. "The woman Richard calls a part of this family has been sleeping with my husband." The entire backyard fell into stunned silence. People stopped mid-conversation, their faces frozen in shock. Jessica's face turned bright red for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure, standing tall. "Lisa!" Richard shouted, his voice booming. "What nonsense are you spouting? This is not the place for such accusations." "Accusations?" I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm simply stating the truth. Or would you rather continue to protect this lie?" Carol stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "Mark," she yelled, her voice trembling. "What have you done? How could you betray Lisa like this?" Mark hung his head, unable to look anyone in the eye. "Mom, I made a mistake." "Mistake?" Carol shouted, tears welling up in her eyes. "This isn't a mistake, Mark. This is a betrayal. You've destroyed your marriage, and you've shattered our trust." Richard stepped closer, his expression one of irritation. "Carol, you're overreacting," he said, his voice lowered but still commanding. "Affairs happen. This is a private matter, and it should be dealt with discreetly." "I'm not overreacting," Carol cried, her tears now streaming down her face. "Richard, can't you see? Lisa has been betrayed. Our son has done something unforgivable, and you want to sweep it under the rug?" Jessica stepped in, her voice cool and collected. "Dad, I'm sorry if this has caused any trouble, but I don't think Lisa has the right to air our personal issues in front of everyone like this." "Do you think you have the right to speak like this, Jessica?" Carol yelled, pointing a finger at her. "You've ruined this family. You are not a part of this family anymore." Richard raised his hand, signaling for silence. "That's enough," he barked. "I won't let anyone ruin this party. We will deal with this later." I looked around, feeling like I was standing in the eye of a storm. "No," I said loudly. "We're dealing with this right now." I refused to stay quiet any longer. I turned to Mark, tears blurring my vision, but my voice was firm. "You've lost me, Mark. And if you think I'm going to keep quiet to protect your reputation, you're wrong." Carol reached out, tears in her eyes. "Lisa, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." I shook my head, stepping back. "It's too late for apologies." Jessica smirked, stepping closer. "You really think you can change anything here, Lisa? I've always been the one this family loves, and that's not going to change just because you're upset." I stared at her, feeling the last bit of my patience snap. "You might think you've won, Jessica, but I'm done playing this game. I'm done being silent." I took a deep breath and addressed the crowd, who were now whispering and looking around in shock. "Everyone here deserves to know the truth. Mark and Jessica have been having an affair for months. I've kept quiet for too long, but not anymore." With that, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving behind a stunned silence and a broken family. I knew I had started a war, but I didn't care anymore. The truth was out, and I was ready to face whatever came next. After leaving the party, I drove to my mother's house without looking back. I felt an unusual sense of relief after finally speaking the truth. But that feeling only lasted for a moment. As I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, I was hit by a wave of emptiness. It felt like I had just walked through a storm, and now all that remained was a deadly silence. My mother, Margaret, was sitting in the living room, looking at me with a worried expression. "Lisa, what happened? You look like you've just been through a battle." I sank into the chair, and tears began to roll down my cheeks. Mom, I told everyone everything. I exposed the truth in front of Mark's entire family. Margaret sighed, sitting down beside me and wrapping her arms around me. You did the right thing, Lisa. You shouldn't have kept silent any longer. But it won't be easy. They'll try to pressure you, especially Richard. I sat outside my mother's house, looking out at the yard covered in fallen leaves. The feelings of emptiness and pain still weighed heavily on my chest. Every day, I received countless messages from Mark, begging me to give him a second chance. He wrote, "Lisa, I will change. I'll do anything to get you back. Please don't leave me." But I couldn't erase the image of them kissing on my couch, right in the home we had built together. All his apologies now felt empty and meaningless. Jessica didn't stop messaging either. This time, her texts were longer, full of explanations about her mistake and her plea for my forgiveness. She wrote, "Lisa, I'm truly sorry. I was foolish and didn't think about the consequences. I just want us to move past this and continue being friends." Friends? Did she actually think that after everything, I would still want to be friends with her? The hypocrisy in her words made me sick. One late afternoon, I received another message from Richard. He asked to meet me to talk like adults. I knew he would try to convince me to stay silent and go back to Mark, but I agreed to meet him anyway. We met at a small cafe. Richard was already seated, looking stern. He started off with gentle words, but I could sense the manipulation in every sentence. "Lisa, I understand you're in a lot of pain," he said. "But Mark is my son. He made a mistake, but we are family. Situations like this should be handled quietly, for everyone's sake." I looked at him, feeling the anger rising inside me. "You think I should go back and pretend nothing happened? You want me to cover up this lie just so you can preserve the family's image?" Richard frowned, his tone becoming more forceful. "Sometimes, to keep the peace, we have to sacrifice our personal grievances. If you forgive, things can return to the way they were." I stood up, staring him straight in the eyes. "No, things will never go back to the way they were. I will not stay silent. You and Mark can keep hiding the truth, but I won't." I walked out of the cafe, feeling like a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I knew I had chosen the harder path, but it was the only one I could take. The truth was out, and I wasn't going to look back. I returned home, where my mother was waiting with a faint but hopeful smile. "You did the right thing, Lisa," she said. "You finally stood up for yourself." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief for the first time in months. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was ready to face it, no matter how tough it would be. Reflecting on everything that happened, I realized this is not just a story about Mark's betrayal or Jessica's deceit. It is also a story about the downfall of a family when power and ego are placed above honesty and love. I chose my own path, a difficult one, but a path filled with freedom. But the family I was once a part of, will they continue down the same old road, hiding and protecting their mistakes, or will they learn to face the truth? Now, I want to ask you, the readers who have followed my story to the very end, does Richard deserve his role as the head of the family? Were his actions motivated by a desire to protect his son, or was he more concerned with safeguarding his own reputation? Did he help heal the wounds, or was he the one deepening the cracks that cannot be mended? And if it were you, what would you do in this situation? Would you forgive Mark and continue the marriage? Or would you walk away, as I did?